At the height of his power, Conor McGregor didn't just talk like a champion. He talked like a man reading tomorrow's newspaper. Long before the belts, long before the lights, he described the life in eerie detail. The mansion, the money climbing, the world watching, and then one line that lands like a cold shadow over everything that came after. And then I'm gone. In the UFC, predictions are usually marketing. With McGregor, they became a worldview, a kind of self-written prophecy where reality was forced to catch up. He chased greatness the way an artist chases a masterpiece, and he said it himself. To sit at the pinnacle of any game, you have to be a little gone. But here's the question that makes this story uncomfortable. How far are you willing to go before the obsession starts taking pieces of you back? This isn't a video about a single loss, or one bad night, or one headline that changed public opinion. This is the story of how the same hunger that made McGregor a global phenomenon began to demand a darker payment, step by step, until the version of him people fell in love with started to feel harder to find. Because when you achieve the impossible, when you become the first to do what nobody else dared to do, what's left to chase, that still feels real. And when the world keeps rewarding the loudest version of you, can you still hear the quiet part that used to keep you disciplined? By the end of this story, the moment that broke Conor McGregor won't look like a single event. It will look like a sequence from nothing to something to everything, and then to the one place fame never prepares you for. After. Before the world knew the name Conor McGregor, there was nothing glamorous about his life. He wasn't born into privilege, and there was no safety net waiting for him if the dream failed. Growing up in Dublin, he followed the path expected of many young men around him. A trade job, early mornings, long commutes, and a future that felt already written. He has spoken openly about standing on cold construction sites, watching older workers with worn-down bodies, and realizing that this could easily become his permanent reality. That realization didn't just scare him, it enraged him, and that anger became fuel. When McGregor walked into Straight Blast Gym and met John Kavanagh, something clicked. Unlike traditional gyms that forced fighters into rigid systems, this environment encouraged expression, creativity, and movement. For Conor, it wasn't just training, it was escape. He showed up constantly, often without money, sometimes unable to pay, but always unwilling to leave. What separated him from others wasn't raw athletic talent, it was obsession. He trained twice a day, every day, visualizing success with a level of detail that bordered on compulsion. He didn't hope to win. He rehearsed it mentally until it felt inevitable. That mindset quickly spilled into his words. McGregor began predicting outcomes publicly, not as trash talk, but as self-programming. He spoke victories into existence, convincing himself first, then everyone else. Many laughed. An Irish fighter talking about world titles sounded absurd to a sport dominated by American and Brazilian champions. But Conor didn't adjust his belief to match reality. He forced reality to chase his belief. Each win reinforced the pattern. The louder the doubt, the sharper his focus became. Inside the cage, this obsession translated into precision. McGregor fought with timing, distance control, and an understanding of rhythm that felt calculated rather than emotional. He wasn't reckless, he was deliberate. Outside the cage, however, the persona grew rapidly. Confidence turned into bravado, bravado turned into spectacle, and spectacle became inseparable from who he was. The fighter and the character fused into one identity. That fusion was powerful, but it carried risk. When your entire sense of self is tied to dominance, there is no off switch. There is no middle ground. It's all or nothing. At this stage, Conor McGregor was still climbing, and obsession was an advantage. It sharpened him. It protected him from fear. But obsession doesn't know when to stop. And as his wins grew bigger, so did the demands of the persona he had created. The machine was working perfectly, but it was already asking for more than just victories. By the time Conor McGregor entered the UFC, belief was no longer just internal. It had become contagious. From his very first walkout, there was an energy that felt different, calculated confidence mixed with theatrical certainty. He didn't speak like a newcomer hoping to survive. He spoke like someone who had already seen the ending. Every interview, every prediction, every dismissal of opponents was delivered with the same unshakable tone. This was inevitable. And slowly, the sport began to move in his direction. Inside the octagon, McGregor validated the talk with precision. His striking wasn't wild or desperate. It was measured, patient, and punishing. He understood distance better than most, using timing to pull opponents into traps they didn't see coming. Each finish reinforced the myth that was forming around him. But the real turning point wasn't just the wins. It was how visibly opponents reacted to him before the fights even began. The trash talk wasn't noise. It was pressure. And pressure changes people. That pressure reached its peak in the build-up to the title fight against Jose Aldo, the long-reigning UFC featherweight champion who had been unbeaten for nearly a decade. For months, McGregor attacked Aldo's composure relentlessly. He mocked him, invaded his space, and challenged his identity as a champion. Cameras caught Aldo reacting emotionally, visibly irritated, while Conor remained relaxed, smiling, in control. By the time fight night arrived, the psychological battle was already tilted. When the bell rang, the impossible happened in seconds. McGregor landed a perfectly timed left hand, knocking Aldo out almost instantly and capturing the featherweight title in the fastest championship finish in UFC history. In that moment, belief turned into destiny. Everything Conor McGregor had said was no longer arrogance, it was evidence. The sport didn't just witness a new champion. It witnessed the birth of a phenomenon. What followed was an explosion. Fans across the world mimicked his walk, his words, his confidence. The UFC found itself with a star that transcended the sport. McGregor wasn't just winning fights, he was selling dreams. When he later captured a second belt, becoming the first fighter to hold 2 UFC titles simultaneously, the myth felt complete. He had cracked the code psychological warfare, precision striking, and perfect timing. But hidden beneath the celebration was a dangerous shift. The belief that once fueled discipline was now being rewarded without restraint. Fame amplified every impulse. The persona demanded constant escalation. And when you reach a point where winning no longer surprises anyone, the question changes. It's no longer, can you do it? It becomes, what can you possibly do next? At the peak of his dominance, Conor McGregor wasn't just winning titles. He was redefining what success in combat sports looked like. Belts brought status, but money brought freedom, and freedom began to change the center of gravity in his career. When talk of a crossover fight with Floyd Mayweather Jr. became reality, many dismissed it as spectacle. In truth, it was something far more significant. It was the moment where the reward system that had driven McGregor for years was quietly replaced. For most fighters, motivation is simple: survival, legacy, and the next paycheck. For Conor, the Mayweather bout represented a financial leap so extreme that it rewired priorities. The numbers alone were staggering. Over $100 million for a single night, a figure that dwarfed anything he had earned inside the UFC. Suddenly, discipline, weight cuts, and years of incremental progress had to compete with instant, generational wealth. And while McGregor publicly framed the fight as another conquest, something subtle shifted beneath the bravado. In the build-up, the old confidence was still there, but it carried a different texture. The hunger felt less about proving something and more about validating a lifestyle. Interviews focused less on craft and more on dominance beyond the sport. He spoke openly about doing whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. That line mattered, because in high-performance environments, limits are what create structure. Remove them, and obsession no longer has direction. Inside the boxing ring, McGregor exceeded many expectations early, even winning moments against a master technician. But the ending was inevitable. Mayweather adjusted, took control, and stopped him. The loss itself wasn't catastrophic. In fact, it barely mattered. McGregor walked away richer than almost any fighter in history, and that was the real problem. For the first time, losing didn't hurt. When he returned to MMA discussions, the urgency was gone. Training camps became flexible. Comeback timelines stretched. The idea of when I feel like it replaced the relentless structure that once defined him. Fighters waiting for title shots grew frustrated. Divisions stalled. Meanwhile, Conor McGregor lived openly as a global celebrity, indulging in a lifestyle that rewarded excess rather than restraint. This wasn't a fall yet. It was a drift. The edge that once made him dangerous was dulled not by defeat, but by abundance. When everything becomes easy, discipline feels optional. And for a fighter whose greatest weapon was obsession, that shift was profound. The sport hadn't figured it out yet, but the equation was changing. The question was no longer whether Conor McGregor could win another fight. It was whether he still needed to. The shift in Conor McGregor's career didn't announce itself with a single loss or a dramatic decline in skill. It arrived through behavior. Small moments at first, then louder ones, until the line between promotion and reality began to blur. The most visible signal came in April 2018, when McGregor stormed a UFC event in Brooklyn searching for Khabib Nurmagomedov. What followed the attack on the fighter bus wasn't trash talk. It was chaos. Windows were smashed, fighters were injured, and suddenly, the persona that once existed for cameras spilled violently into the real world. The legal consequences were real. McGregor was arrested and later pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct, avoiding jail time but leaving behind something far more damaging than a charge sheet. The aura of control cracked. What once looked like calculated intimidation now felt reckless. The public narrative shifted from genius promoter to volatile star. And at the center of it all was the same obsession that had once fueled greatness, now untethered. That chaos carried directly into the build-up for the fight the sport had been circling for years. McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. This wasn't just a championship bout. It was cultural, personal, and deeply emotional. Unlike previous rivalries, Khabib didn't engage for attention. He absorbed insults silently and treated the conflict as something to be settled only inside the cage. That contrast mattered. While McGregor escalated with increasingly personal attacks, Khabib prepared with singular focus. On fight night, the difference was visible. Khabib Nurmagomedov imposed his will with relentless pressure, dragging McGregor into positions where confidence and charisma offered no escape. For brief moments, Conor showed resilience, even stealing a round. But the direction of the fight never changed. When the submission came, it wasn't just a loss of the belt, it was the collapse of an image. The version of McGregor that thrived on chaos met an opponent who fed on control. The aftermath only deepened the damage. The brawl following the fight turned a sporting event into a global controversy. Sponsors hesitated, fans polarized, and for the first time, the UFC's biggest star looked less like an asset and more like a liability. The persona had overtaken the fighter, and the discipline that once anchored him was gone. This was the moment many point to as the break, but the truth is more uncomfortable. The fight with Khabib didn't create the downfall, it revealed it. And once something is exposed at that level, there is no going back to who you were before. After the loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov, something fundamental changed around Conor McGregor. It wasn't just the absence of a belt or the sting of defeat. It was the disappearance of inevitability. For years, opponents walked into fights already half-beaten by his presence. After UFC 229, that spell was broken. The myth no longer protected him, and without it, every return carried a different weight. In the months that followed, McGregor oscillated between declarations of retirement and promises of explosive comebacks. The structure that once defined his rise was gone, replaced by long layoffs and bursts of activity that felt disconnected. When he returned against Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone in January 2020, the result was decisive. A dominant win in just 40 seconds seemed to suggest that the old Conor was back, calm, focused, efficient, but that moment turned out to be a flash, not a revival. The trilogy with Dustin Poirier told a harsher story. In their second fight, McGregor suffered a knockout loss, something that would have been unthinkable at his peak. What followed was not reflection, but escalation. The build-up to the third fight became darker, angrier, more personal. Gone was the playful confidence. In its place stood someone fighting the narrative as much as the opponent. Inside the cage at UFC 264, the aggression came fast, but it lacked clarity. And when McGregor suffered the catastrophic leg injury, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. His body had finally forced a stop that his mind refused to accept. Outside the octagon, the pattern worsened. Public incidents, arrests, and civil cases began to overshadow athletic discussion. Videos circulated, headlines multiplied. Each controversy chipped away at what remained of the disciplined martial artist image. McGregor himself admitted struggling with staying straight and narrow, acknowledging how environment and excess pulled him off course. The fighter who once spoke about obsession as a tool now seemed trapped inside it. Perhaps the most unsettling part was the repetition. Promised returns never materialized. Weight classes changed, opponents shifted. The hunger to train consistently appeared replaced by the need to remain relevant. In interviews, McGregor still spoke in absolutes, still predicted dominance, but the words no longer carried the same gravity. They sounded like echoes of a man trying to summon a version of himself that no longer existed. This is where the story becomes less about wins and losses, and more about identity. Conor McGregor didn't lose his career in one fight, one night, or one scandal. He lost it gradually, as the distance between who he was and who he became grew wider. The obsession that once built him demanded constant escalation, and when reality couldn't keep up, it turned inward. By the time the aura faded completely, the damage was already done not to his record, but to the foundation that made greatness sustainable in the first place. The story of Conor McGregor was never meant to be ordinary. From the beginning, he framed his life as a vision, a prediction spoken so clearly that reality seemed to bend toward it. And for a time, it did. He became a world champion, a global icon, and one of the most influential figures the UFC has ever seen. But hidden inside that success was a question that no belt or payday could answer. What happens after the dream comes true? For McGregor, obsession was both the engine and the fuel. It lifted him out of anonymity, sharpened his confidence, and allowed him to dominate opponents before the fight even began. Yet obsession does not recognize balance. It only understands momentum. When the rewards became limitless and the structure disappeared, the same mindset that once created discipline began to erode it. The persona grew louder as the foundation grew weaker, and slowly, the fighter people believed in became harder to recognize. There was no single punch that broke Conor McGregor, no single night where everything collapsed. What broke him was the accumulation of moments where control slipped, where identity became performance, and where winning no longer demanded sacrifice. The aura didn't vanish because he lost fights. It vanished because belief without structure can't survive success. Today, the question surrounding McGregor isn't whether he can return to the octagon. It's whether the version of him that once inspired millions still exists beneath the noise. Was he an artist who lost his way in the pursuit of greatness? Or was the chaos always part of the design, waiting for the right moment to take over? In the end, Conor McGregor's story isn't just about fame or failure. It's a reminder that the hardest opponent any champion will ever face isn't across the cage. It's the person they become when there's nothing left to chase.